bucket, mix it up, and then you take a composite sample to send in. Does anybody know why we need to use a plastic bucket when we're sampling our soils?
So you're not sampling your metal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Laura, could you talk about how to sample if you have a shovel and don't have a soil probe?
So you want to, I like to do just like a, I don't know, like a core, I don't know how to describe it. Like a, I wish I had a picture, but I usually just make a small hole and then or like a round hole, so it's like a cone, a conal shape, and then I cut off the sides, and then I any like organic debris on the top, and then I put that in a bucket to make a composite sample in multiple areas. Do you do it any differently?
Well, sometimes I use a spade because
Yeah.
I forgot my,
Yeah.
probe. So think about the calibrations. All the research on soil testing is based on taking a probe, and in a plow it'd be 6 inches. It depends on, again, maybe 4 inches if it's a pasture or hayfield, but it's made this probe. And think about a probe being like a 1 by 1 inch column going down. So if you take a spade, take a hole out, and then take another slice only an inch wide and then cut that away. It's a little more work, but you can get something that's close, approximating what a probe would be. At least that's how I'd like to think about it. But, yeah.
And that top 6 inches is really where you're going to have, or 4 to 6 is where you've got most of your root growth, and that's where most of your nutrient activity is going to be happening, and where your plants are going to be maximizing.
But can I?
Yeah.
Standing back there, it really struck me too. 1 cup of soil is representing how many acres? Maybe sometimes 15. It might be a 5-acre field or a 10-acre field. So it's really important to get that representative sample, right? Because that's reflecting, and what you might end up doing for that. You could spend hundreds of dollars based on that one sample. So it's important to really get a good representative sample. Anyway, just wanted to.
Yeah, it's when you've got a lot of fields. Sometimes you want to take those shortcuts, and you don't want to take 15 to 20 subsamples. But it's really important to get quality analysis results, and then you can really address any issues you might be having.
I just wanted to also put it out there that pH kits you can get a really good one for like $50. And in Vermont, since we have so many pH issues, sometimes that's a great investment, because then you can just go out on your own, do 10, 20 samples, know your pHs, and sometimes that's all you need. You don't even need the soil sample submission, if you know you have really low pH, or if you know a field is good. So picking up one of those can often be a great financial move, and it's rapid.
No, that's a good point, and it can help sometimes just solve problems. You might have an issue here, and you can compare the pH to where it looks good to where it looks bad.
And you can do it yourself.
And do that yourself.
Yeah, I've gone into fields with, just a simple little pH test to, to right away with the producer kind of identify, oh wait, so this might be an issue, and they can start making decisions that day based on that.
Can you buy one of these really good pH tests at the garden store, or
Nope.
what are you talking about?
I would say the good ones, the one that I always use is the Cornell pH kit, and you can buy them from the Cornell lab, and it has 2 bottles of solution and then a little key, and then this little kind of dish that you put a little soil in, you put the liquid in, and then you look at the color, and that's a good one to use. The strips aren't quite as good because it's hard to get that soil solution. But I think they're like $50 from Cornell, or I'm sure there's other good ones. But probably not the store, and definitely nothing that is just a probe that you buy from the garden store that gives you pH. Don't trust that either. It's got to be a chemical test.
You can buy some good probes, but they cost more, and then
a lot more.
And
then you have to maintain the probe.
You have to maintain them, yeah.
So getting a good liquid kit.
But those Cornell kits are.
They last forever.
If I can add, the one thing though, part of the soil test is that, you know, when you get a lime recommendation, it's based on both your initial pH, the pH you want to get to, and also then what we call the buffering capacity of that soil. And at UVM, we actually use aluminum to do that. Other states use what they call buffering pH. There's different chemical methods because soils vary in how much lime it takes to get from this pH to this pH. And aluminum really relates to that, so we use aluminum. And so that's the, you know, you don't necessarily, I agree, having that kit can help you identify quickly. But then if you have a real serious problem, you may want to, look at your soil test or start using take a soil test to kind of find out, okay, how much lime do I need to apply to get it up to where it's going to correct that pH.
No, that's okay. Yeah, and just remembering to label well your samples. And depending on how many fields you have too, that's may or may not be more important for you as you submit your soil samples. And then I put this table up here because in this particular farm that I'm kind of thinking about and talking to you about soil fertility, we did the sampling at the end of the season, and you saw in the last picture that there was still snow on the ground, but the ground wasn't necessarily frozen, so we were still able to go out and take those cores. But also just thinking about, especially in hayfields where, in a pasture where you have your animals that are, constantly redepositing nutrients, in a hayfield you don't necessarily have that action. So just thinking about your crop that you're removing from your hayfields, and with that crop you're removing nutrients that were once in your soil. And just some common forages that you may find in your fields, and the amount of removal per year that you might experience when haying if you've got 3 or 4 cuts in your hayfield. So just looking at nitrogen as an example in this column here, and cool season grass, removing up to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Just as a reminder about that. Do you have any comment on any of that?
Well, this came out of a bulletin we have on our nutrient recommendations at UVM, and so keep in mind this is based on this typical yield. Okay, so that 150 is based on a 4-ton yield per year. So something I just learned years ago, maybe I'm an agronomist, I should know these things, right? So, but a couple of numbers that I just keep in my mind is for every ton of yield you take off for hay, you're probably removing 15 to maybe 20 pounds of phosphorus, P2O5 per ton. And potassium can be anywhere from, really, I use 50 as kind of my number in my mind. So if you took a couple of cuttings off this past year, and you can count up your hay bales, and you got, let's say, 3 tons per acre, you can quickly estimate how much potassium you removed. And if it's a sandy soil, you might be depleting that potassium pretty quickly over time. So those are kind of good figures I keep in my mind, is that kind of 15 and 50. Nitrogen's a funny one, there's a lot, it's so dynamic in the soil. You got to really think about all its sources. But for P and K, it's fairly straightforward, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, just gonna briefly go through, what you might see when you submit a soil sample and the analysis you get back. You've got your macronutrients, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium at the top. This is a UVM format of your analysis, and showing, from low to high or excessive amounts of those nutrients, and then your pH and your organic matter. And you won't typically see nitrogen on a soil analysis, and that is due to how dynamic it is and how much it moves throughout your soil profile at different times of the year. And then you have your recommendations on the bottom, and since this field was in a 6.2 pH, you know, in that 6 pH range, no time for, you know, grass, hay, no lime was recommended. But this was surprising to me because this field had been out of production for quite a, you know, at least a few years, so their pH was okay still, which, yeah, that was surprising to me about this particular field.
Can I just throw
Yeah.
a comment
Yes.
in? 6.2 is kind of that's our threshold. If you're above 6.2 for most crops, we don't give a lime recommendation at UVM. Unless it's alfalfa, and there's a couple of crops more sensitive. They need a higher pH. So alfalfa needs a pH of 6.7 to 7. So we will still get a lime recommendation. So if you had put in, you're going to interseed alfalfa in here, it probably would have given a lime recommendation. But just looking at that, 6.2 is right the bottom limit. So, and maybe you're going to, you know, down the road,
Yeah.
this may drop in the next couple of years. So it's something to watch.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
that I suggested was, you know, you might, if you are able and you have the resources, still apply some lime to maintain that level. Because once it starts to drop, and we saw the graph that Sid showed before, it's harder to bring it back up than to maintain it.
Or
So-
this might be a case where wood ash
Right.
on a regular basis to
Yeah.
meet potassium could also help maintain that pH some. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then just some specifics about how to apply your nutrients, you know, when you're doing particularly nitrogen and potassium, which are soluble and more mobile throughout your soil solution, and those are nutrients that you want to apply in split applications throughout the year, whereas phosphorus is more stable within the soil and doesn't move as well unless your soil moves. So typically there'll be a suggestion as to when you want to apply that, those particularly nitrogen, potassium. Yeah.
For the pH and talking about 6.2 being kind of the bottom limit, are there any groups of like pasture forage species that really don't do well at 6.2, like alfalfa, and you need it higher?
Alfalfa is the one we upped the recommended. Clovers do fine at this,
Okay.
and trefoil does, you know, fine at that 6.2. Now there may be other benefits at being at 6.5. You know, that efficiency is a little better for nutrient, and you know, just trying to weigh the balance of the cost of doing these things. The 6.2 is kind of, I think, the minimum.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Does UVM run all these tests, or do they farm some of the tests out?
So these tests actually go to the University of Maine, and then the analysis is adjusted for Vermont. So University of Maine does the analysis. Yeah. They used to do it at UVM, but I'm not sure how long ago they
So
switched.
part of it depends on the extract that's used, and the chemical process itself for a soil lab. So Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island all use the same, what we call the modified Morgan extract. And there may be subtle different recommendations depending on the needs of those states, but the analysis part comes out identical. In other words, the lab at UVM was doing a process that would give the same analysis as what Maine was doing. So several years ago, just the economics drove, it made sense for us to consolidate. So Maine does the analysis, but those come back to UVM for the interpretation and recommendation. Just like how many of you are from New Hampshire? Do you use the UNH soil test, I hope?
Actually, well, you said from New Hampshire, so I said, well, yes, but I live in Vermont.
Okay, so New Hampshire, they actually use a different extract. Their soil chemists decided the malic, which is a different extract, was better for most of the soils in New Hampshire. Penn State uses that one, so they outsource and Penn State does the analysis. Kind of, I mean, it's just, you know, economics of running analysis. Yes?
Why I ask is, we used to live in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and I was using the soil tests every year for recommendations, and we had a real problem with phosphorus. And it wound up that, I believe, Penn State, again, this is a long time ago, they were farming it out, and/or they weren't actually running the tests, they were taking county averages. So my question is, this is outside your control now. If you're relying upon Maine, are they actually running all the tests?
Maine is.
Oh, yes.
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 Okay.
Yeah. That, I gotta talk to you about, I used to work at Penn State, so I gotta. But we had a lab at the time, I thought it was still there, but I think.
Well, it became a problem, the county agent and all shared that with me off the record, so.
All right, I'll talk to you afterwards, I gotta find out about that. They are run though, the analysis for every test is run, absolutely.
Oh, this slide is just a former faculty member at UVM looked at some soil tests, a little soil test survey, I guess, and noted that a third of the fields in Vermont were significantly acidic, a third were low in potassium, and more than a quarter were low in phosphorus. And this particular field that and farm that I was working with, they weren't low in phosphorus, but they weren't at the optimum level of phosphorus. And when we were discussing how to address the different fertility needs that this farm had, with the agreement with their neighbor of the field that they were using, the neighbor didn't want that farm to use a commercial custom blend of NPK in their field. They wanted something, you know, that was like a manure or the use of legumes, something that was a little more natural, not necessarily organic, but looking for something that would feed their soil more than a commercial blend might. And so we were thinking about different ways in which, or what kind of sources we could use based on where he was. And he lived next to a dairy farm, and of course we know that dairy manure is a great source of nutrients and also organic matter and nutrients and micronutrients for our field. So he had the local dairy farmer come and spread. And then we also thought about using poultry litter. I reached out to some other folks that work in the same region that I do, and asked, what are organic farms or farms who aren't using commercial fertilizers using to address nutrient deficiencies that may not necessarily be high in phosphorus, and which manure can become a problem if you start having phosphorus built up in your soils. And poultry litter is something that some folks turn to amend their fields. Does anybody use chicken litter on their fields? So chicken litter also adds that organic matter in addition to the nutrients that you might need or deficiencies you might be having, except that it's more concentrated in this type of manure. So all manures provide different levels and different concentrations of nutrients depending on what the animals are eating and what types of animals they are. And so these two tables are just showing, looking at total nitrogen out of dairy manures. We've got from 8 pounds per ton to 22 pounds per ton of nitrogen, and then in chicken litter, depending on what type of, if it's a layer or a broiler, we go from 37 to 75 pounds per ton of total nitrogen. So it's quite a difference, and so in this case, chicken litter was an option that we could turn to because phosphorus also increases with the different manure types, and since they weren't concerned about their phosphorus levels, then that was an alternative that we decided to look at.
What was the source, or you're about to say that,
The source of,
the chicken litter that you helped them look into?
it was this was from North Country Organics, and it came from the Midwest. The
You
litter-
talking about Cheap Cheap?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's expensive stuff.
so,
I thought they were looking at something like from Giroux or something local.
not from North Country Organics. I mean, you can get churros, and
Yeah,
but we were thinking about local dealers
Oh,
in the
okay.
area. So, and that's what they had.
yeah.
So yeah, just a cost comparison of what the litter to the commercial blend for the specific nutrients needs on this field. You know, almost $700 for a ton of litter compared to, you know, $466 with the commercial blend. So also again, thinking about your resources, and because there was some flexibility in, you know, who was spending money on these amendments, they were able to go with that chicken litter in this particular case. So what has your experience been, how has your experience been with the chicken litter in your fields?
Very good.
Yep.
Where'd you get yours?
Well, I've been in a couple different states. The most recent was from across the river in New York.
Mm-hmm.
They brought it over from
Yeah.
New York.
Yeah.
We were actually closer to Maine, but we were on the New Hampshire-Maine border, but I was concerned with the source of Maine. So we got it from across, so we trucked it in, but the economics of all were just as good, so.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes that can be, we bought some of this for research because it's easy to spread on small plots, but I would certainly look more at the local sources. You can get it a lot cheaper than these kind of products.
And it was an intermediary that was sourcing it.
Yeah,
It was a Vermont Organic organization that was sourcing it.
sourcing it.
Yes.
Yeah,
But you had to worry about one of the big things was actually spreading it because of the moisture content and screening and so forth, so.
can everybody hear the gentleman up here? Okay, good. Yeah, so moisture content in spreading it.
Yeah, gummed up and trying to get it into screens and things of that nature.
Yeah,
So it wasn't a pelletized litter?
It was just bulk litter.
Okay, because that would probably change your costs as
oh,
well.
yeah, you could make it a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for organic, that I know a number of organic hay producers that'll use that
Right.
source. Just got to watch your phosphorus levels.
Right, yes. So, moving on from fertility, thinking about some weeds, I'm gonna let Sid.
Sure. So I asked about weeds earlier. So again, thinking about renovating an old rundown hayfield, I can't, a lot of times when I've been on a farm, and I think all of you would agree, those weeds might be more just telling us, you know, there's a problem. They're encroaching because our forage plants are weak, right? And again, it's a constant battle. Most of our forage plants are perennials, but they're kind of short-term perennials. You know, especially the legumes may only persist for anywhere from 2 to 5, 6 years, unless they're reseeding themselves, and even then it's a perpetual trying to encourage them to continue. Our grasses can last a long time, but they're always, if you think about a perennial grass, it's constantly propagating itself. When it grows new tillers, those are new propagules. So again, management can encourage or discourage the perenniality of our grasses. So when I see weeds, I often think, okay, what's wrong? It might be fertility, it might be pH or something else, or it might be cutting management, or it might just be, and this sometimes is, you just had a bad, terrible climate event, you know, excess rainfall, floods, something that really disrupted your system that really set it back. And but weeds can be a clue on that. But most of the weeds that and the ones you guys mentioned, I think most of them are perennial weeds in these systems. Some oftentimes creeping perennials, because those are the toughest. So I've got one thing. So identifying your weeds, and it sounds like a lot of you guys have identified them. That doesn't mean I can help you solve that problem with Buttercup, but at least you know what it is. This is how many of you have this book? It's been around for 30 years. I know you have it. I required it in my weeds class I taught for years and years. It's a good practical book. There were 3 weed scientists that wrote it initially from Cornell. And the good thing was, one of these guys was a turf guy. And so he made sure all the turf weeds were in this book. And the nice thing about that is most of the turf weeds are also our forage and pasture weeds. So there's a lot of good weeds in this book that you may not get from a kind of weed book you'd get out of the Midwest, which is more geared toward row crops. Yes?
I use an app called Picture This.
Yes.
Yeah, it is awesome because when you're in the field, you have your phone, take a picture of it, and it pulls up options, and it's usually the first one.
And I haven't played with it enough. Some of those apps are getting better and better for plant identification.
iNaturalist is another one.
What's it?
iNaturalist.
Yes. Yes. So iNaturalist, plant. What's it called again?
Picture This.
Picture This. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you young folks got to keep it. But more important is, if you identify that weed, is to dig into about it. Try to read up. Because what is it? A perennial? Is it a creeping perennial? Is it an annual? Those can make a difference sometimes in how you might manage for it too. Last night, Bruce Hennessy was talking about a weed he had just seen, and he said, yeah, it's some kind of nightshade. And I said, well, what, horse nettle? That's the first thing that came. He said, no, it's not horse nettle. It's got this big. I said, is it Jimson weed? He said, yes, Jimson weed. Well, that's very toxic. You don't want your livestock grazing it. But it's an annual, so it might make you think about how to manage, because an annual, oftentimes, you're going to manage it a little differently than a perennial. So that's a good thing. If you want to, thanks for those apps. I don't have any of those. A couple of websites nearby. UMass has a great website called the UMass Extension Weed Herbarium. It's not total. You got to kind of know what plant it is. You can't work through it. So those apps are great for that, because they can narrow down what it is. But if you think you know what it is, this is a good one to go on, because this one shows different detailed pictures of different plant parts for many of the weeds. So and for again a local site, local as in New England, I think it's a really nice. I use this site a lot. Probably more than any of the others. There's some other good ones out there. I think Virginia Tech has a good one that I've used, and probably more and more, if you want to. So a couple things. Did anybody mention bed straw earlier? How many of you have a bed straw issue? Yeah, okay. So again, this is, in pastures, this is probably the one I come across the most. But this is a tough weed. It's a creeping perennial, but it also produces a lot of seed, and it'll flower starting in June, and I've seen it flowering all the way through the season, and I've seen it greening up. There's again an old hayfield near where I live that I used to walk my dogs a lot, and I remember walking through there in February. We had a melt. And what was greening up in there was bed straw, And that was a good example of it. I saw a patch of it near one side of the field when I first moved there, and within 3 or 4 or 5 years it had spread, So it's a tough one. Yes?
We've had a little bit here and there, and my sheep definitely eat it.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you are forcing them to be competitive by moving them every day. And,
right. When it's young is what I've always been told by especially sheep farmers, that they can raise it.
And it's kind of gone away now.
What's that?
They'll eat the flowers.
They'll eat the flowers. Yeah. Yeah.
And actually cows will also.
right,
Not
right.
like
Horses will not.